Welcome to the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Dame, holistic nutrition coach and speaker. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode on the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast. I'm being joined today by an extremely special guest and a dear friend and very important person in my life. Deanna is here to help me and help all of you really sort of blow the lid off of this topic of psychedelic therapy and use of psychedelics in our healing journeys, which has actually been a huge part of my journey, as I mentioned in the intro. So welcome, Deanna, and thank you so much for being here today and helping me have this conversation on the podcast.
Yeah, hi, Danny. It's so good to be here, and you're truly one of my favorite people, so it's really, really special and nice to spend a morning with you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, and that means so much more to me, considering you've seen me in some of my most intimate, wounded, painful, traumatic places, and to be witnessed in that way and to still be one of your favorite people just is really really touching and and a beautiful testament to exactly what we're talking about today. So
because as you say that, you've seen me in my trauma and my hard places, and really all I see is your beauty and your light and your gifts. That's all I see in you.
Yeah. And, through this work, that's what I see too, right? And that's been such a gift in this, and so many gifts that, we'll talk more about. But let's start off with just a bit of your story. I think this is really important as people are getting to know you, and understanding what you've been through and the lens that you're coming, to this conversation in. So will you share a little bit with everybody listening, a little bit about who you are? Obviously, I know there's we have to kind of tread gently around that because of the illegal nature of this conversation that we're having. But just, as a human, as Deanna, what's kind of got you into this work that you're doing and have so gratefully gifted to me and Ben?
So, maybe I'll just start kind of at the beginning. I was raised in a family that coped with stress and upset and their own trauma with alcohol and anger. Mm-hmm. So growing up for me, there was a lot of emotional neglect and violence, abusive behavior, and it left me with an imprint of feeling very alone and very afraid. And I took the skills that I learned as a kid and developed my own dependency on alcohol. And when I was in my mid-40s, it was really amping up to a place of wow, I really need to be looking at this. It was really affecting my relationship with my kids, my relationship with my partner. And when I wasn't drinking, I was working. So I was doing a lot of just distracting and numbing. Yeah. And I was in and out of different talk therapy since I was probably 19. And I was gaining a little bit of self-awareness here and there, and getting a better understanding of why I'm doing the things that I'm doing. But I wasn't really able to start making any significant changes in my life. I was still doing the things I was doing, and I was feeling really stuck and just stuck and a little helpless with it all. Why can't I make any progress? And my youngest son got really curious about working with ayahuasca when he was 18. And after he graduated from high school, decided that he wanted to go to Peru and work with that medicine, and asked if I would go with him. So we went, and we did a number of ceremonies together, and that really changed both of our lives in a big, big way. We both have continued to work with ayahuasca over these years. And during that time of, I gained a lot working with ayahuasca, but what I came to realize was that I'm still alone. I'm in a group ceremony. There's no communication, there's no co-processing in that space. And I felt like, wow, okay, I'm doing work, but I'm doing it alone. And I reached out to a therapist who was doing MDMA therapy. And I started working with that medicine in connection with another human, with someone who could see me, hold me, help me to see things accurately, and outside of the lens of my own trauma. He was able to show me new perspectives. And that is when things really started to move for me. So I worked with this therapist and MDMA and other medicines as well, like 2CB and LSD, and spent quite a bit of time just doing my own work in that way. And I was still traveling to Peru and working with ayahuasca at this time too. So it was a really intense number of years of doing a lot of really big personal work and really uncovering the truth about me, and not the distortions that I was believing from the trauma that I was carrying. And eventually, on my last trip to Peru, I actually went there to go and work as a volunteer facilitator at an ayahuasca retreat center. And that's when I really dropped into like my deep desire to step in as a facilitator in this work. And so I spent some time in Peru with ayahuasca, and then I came back and talked to my therapist and asked if he would mentor me to start doing this work as a space holder. So that's how that all started. And even, certainly during this time of being a facilitator, I am still deeply in my own work and continuing to do my own processing and my own uncovering, and which I think is just so necessary if you're going to be a facilitator or a space holder, that you are deeply familiar with what these processes can unfold, because anything and everything comes up here. Mm-hmm. So it's been really helpful for me to recognize when I'm working as a facilitator where somebody is at, and know, okay, you're here. We can do this. I know where you are. I know you can do this, and we can do it together.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that is so important for anybody looking to, not even get into this work, but even working with a therapist or working with a coach. This is like something that's very important to me. It's like showing that I'm still in this, right? We're still in this together. Like I'm still growing and learning and working, right? So wherever you're looking for a mentor or someone in your life, right? I think that's such an important lens to look through. Like, is this person still working on themselves? Are they still, doing the work, right? Because it doesn't end. It doesn't end.
There is no final destination, right? Like,
no. And I really want to thank you for sharing a little bit about your story. And we're going to dive in, because I know a lot of listeners are like, what is half of this stuff that you just talked about, right? We're going to get into actually defining that. But I really wanted to pull out, because this is something that you have really helped me see in a different way. Because I've done my medicine work. The very first time that I did it was in a group. And it was magical and wonderful. And I'm going to share more about that in a different episode. But, working with you has been such a different energy of, like you said, being in connection. And the more that I support my clients, the more I'm doing my own healing work, I see, like, I think you mentioned at one time, and this really stuck with me, right? That, like, as a generalization in our population, like, all of our trauma stems from being in disconnection and being alone, either in our pain or in, like, that is for the masses, like, our core wound. So what are we doing? How are we trying to heal while also being alone, right? And this is a huge thing that, I talk about here on the podcast with my clients, right? Like people struggling, women, all of you here, right? Struggling with your relationship with food and yourself on your own year after year, right? And that's not how we heal. That's actually can sometimes be rewounding. And I know that you've talked a lot about this with me and really helped me see that and understand that, this deeper stuff that I'm working through and going through should not be done alone. And it cannot be done alone. It's just not possible. So yeah, I really wanted to touch on that. So I'm grateful that you mentioned that in this. So for those who, maybe this is totally brand new, and I know that the talk around psychedelic therapy or plant medicine use for healing is becoming more and more public, which is why I'm finally feeling ready and bold enough to come out, here on the podcast publicly. This is the first time I'm actually talking about this publicly outside of my groups and intimate work with my clients. What is psychedelic therapy? I think this is really important. So for anyone who hasn't seen all the news articles in Time Magazine and all the things that are out there, maybe you could help us define, what is this work that we're talking about? What are psychedelics? And how do they actually work in terms of helping us heal?
Mm-hmm. Such a good question and such an important question, because there are different types of psychedelics, and in fact, there are some medicines that I mostly work with that aren't even psychedelics, but we class them as psychedelics. So traditional psychedelics are things like psilocybin mushrooms or magic mushrooms, LSD or acid. Ayahuasca is a traditional psychedelic. And then there are other ones that people may not be familiar with, more synthetic ones like 2CB is also. Even peyote and wachuma is considered a psychedelic, although, and so each of these medicines has a very unique property, and they show up in your experience in very different ways. Though they all sort of have the common thread of they are often hallucinogenic, right? So you might have some fractals or visuals or things like that. Some people may experience what we might call like an ego dissolution or an ego death, and often with these medicines, and with all of these medicines, there is a sense of connection to something greater than ourselves, be that source or creator or God. They can really create a feeling of oneness and acceptance and connection. Then there are other medicines that are really empathogens. So they work in a slightly different way. They are you have a real sense of your heart opening and feeling whole, and they really foster an ease in connection with another. They foster safety, and they work by sort of quieting down the fear center of your brain or your amygdala, which creates this feeling of safety. And they also work to increase your access to your hippocampus or your memory center, and they allow you this beautiful way of going into trauma memories and seeing them with a new perspective, and maybe having a greater understanding of what was happening in that time, like, because you have a better access to your memory there. So these are medicines like MDMA, or what the street name for MDMA is ecstasy. That's not what we use, or it's also known as Molly. In psychedelic therapy, we use a very pure form of MDMA. So it's not the street form. It's not cut with anything else. It's very pure. Ecstasy or Molly are often cut with benzodiazepines or speed or things like that, and so they're not quite the same. Other empathogens there's another medicine called 3-MMC, and I would kind of say that wachuma or San Pedro is more of an empathogen than a psychedelic. It's also a very heart opening medicine. So those are kind of the typical medicines you might run into in this space. There are practitioners working with other medicines, and there are certainly, new medicines coming, as people are really diving into this and exploring this, and even there are people who have synthesized psilocybin and made like a synthetic version of that.
Yeah.
So it's always changing, but it's changing slowly. But there are new things that will continue to come about as this medicine gains popularity. And
yeah, and doing this work. There's so many, right? And I'm even thinking of, I don't know a lot. I'd like to look more into the research, right? But there's certain ones like Iboga and Ibogaine, and like in terms of actually helping specifically with addiction. There's a lot of studies happening around that. I know actually Gabor Mate is involved in some of those, like in Vancouver area, and there's Cambo. There's lots of different Bufo, right? There's so many. There's so many different tools out there. And one of the things that, I really loved in my journey, and I'm hoping that this episode for everyone is just a kicking off point to obviously do your own research. And there's so many great books and documentaries and things out there actually now. And, there's so many avenues that you can go down and understand that these medicines that we're talking about, especially the non-synthetic ones, that haven't, the ones that have come from nature, this is not new, right? These medicines and using psychedelics to access God, right? And to access higher states of consciousness have been around since the dawn of time. Have been used in every tribe and every, in depending on where you are in the world, right? For very sacred spiritual work. And, these traditions have been shoved underground, with obviously, colonization and just all the complications over the decades. And I think that's just important to remember. Like, there's just this movement happening now where it's coming back to the surface again, as it kind of was in the 60s. And then it got shut down with the war on drugs and all this complicated political stuff happened. But this is not new. This is not new work to use medicines to heal and to access higher states of consciousness and become more in tune and better versions of ourselves. So, I think that's a really kind of fun pathway to go down. Anybody who wants to, learn more, I'll make sure there's actually lots of, and I know Deanna, you'll have some resources as well to, after you've listened to this episode, go and dive into some of this stuff. And I'll make sure that the resources are linked below this episode in a big way. So we talked about, you shared, obviously there's a whole basket of different types of empathogens, psychedelics, plant medicines, whatever you want to call them. And we've talked about this a little bit, but why, as maybe an overarching, like, why would people get into this work? Like, what have you seen? And obviously doing your own work and being around this world, what is the benefit, or what are the main benefits to actually getting into this work and using these medicines to support?
So I'll speak specifically to doing one-on-one work with a therapist rather than doing group ceremonial work, because they're pretty different. And so if you can imagine, these sessions are anywhere from 5 to 8 hours long. So if you can imagine being in a state where you feel open-hearted, you feel connected with your facilitator or your therapist, you feel safe, you feel loved and not judged, and you get to spend a whole day with all of the focus and energy on you. And you feel safe enough to start exploring some of your history. And that in those moments of deeper exploration, without, so often when we go into our story, we'll start to shut down, because it'll feel like, ooh, that was too painful, I can't feel that. Or, ooh, if I start feeling that, I'll never stop. Like, if I go into this grief, I won't stop crying. Or if I feel this anger, it will get too big and too explosive, and I'm afraid of that. So when we don't have that heightened fear alive in us, and we can start to explore those really deep feelings of grief or sadness or rage or anger or disgust, we can actually start moving those emotions through our nervous system. They're no longer trapped in our body. We're actually processing and moving through really big experiences, but in a slow, well held, well supported container. And often it's more than one session, because there's often a lot there. And you're not going to clear your lifetime of trauma in an 8-hour session. It would be great if we could. You will clear a lot. And the difference of your body and your nervous system holding a lifetime worth of grief versus releasing even just 10% of that or 20% of that, that's a really big, it can have a profound effect on how you show up in the world. There's just less in the way, and that allows you to show up more as just who you actually are. There's a little bit less blocking who you really are.
Yeah. And, I can really attest to that, in my own experience. And, coming at this conversation, thinking of all of you listening and thinking of the women that I work with and the clients that I work with, this emotional piece is so huge, because this pain that we've covered up, right, is ultimately, for every woman I've worked with, is the reason why we're using food to escape, right? Or alcohol or whatever, right? We've got these coping and numbing mechanisms, any addiction, right, being stemmed from, I can't handle this pain or this emotion or this stuff that happened to me. And I'm just going to stuff it down and I'm going to protect it, right? And you've taught me a lot about this, right? And I've been in the medicine exploring my protectors, right? And how incredibly amazing our subconscious mind is at keeping us, quote unquote, safe, right? By not letting us access these parts of ourselves and staying blocked to them. And when we do that, at least this is my experience, right? We don't really get to access all of life, right? When we stay hidden, right? And we keep the grief down, right? Keep that anger, that pain down, and let's just ignore it. Right? It's like shaking a soda, right? Eventually it's going to explode, and it's going to come out in people pleasing and burnout and addictions and all of these patterns that we all have. Right. And, tying this back into, for those of you who've been listening to the podcast for a while, we talk a lot about mindset. We talk about shifting our belief systems, and hands down, using psychedelics and medicines in this way are one of the quickest ways to actually go in and access these old neural pathways and these old belief systems that ultimately stem from our, childhood experiences or our past lives, and actually get in there to start mixing them up and rewiring them, right? And actually questioning them and clearing them so that we can start to really think and be a different way, and not changing who we are, but actually accessing who we truly are versus the false versions that we've put on our whole lives. So that's, in my words, what I've noticed in this work is just, it's been such a tool to help me continue to connect more with who Danny really is, and really below what society thinks I should be and look like, and the actual, pieces of me that I want to show outward, right? And do that more boldly and with less fear, and live life fuller, right? And more free, and being able to, even recording this podcast. I know I've mentioned to Deanna that, it's taken me this long to record this because there was still that fear of, what are people going to think about me? Right? In doing this work, are people going to think that Danny's just doing drugs and, that she's crazy or something? So this people pleaser in me is still that that need for people to like me. And I'm continuing to peel that back, because that doesn't serve me, and it doesn't serve all of you listening either, to not speak my truth. So side tangent, but that's really important, right?
Yeah, I think you touched on something really important there too, around the rewiring of patterns. And I like to I like to describe going into a psychedelic medicine session as like we go in with a machete into the dense forest and we hack out a new path.
Yeah.
And we're hacking out a new path to the true essence of who you are. And it's, that's all we can do in a medicine session. We don't have time for much more than that, but we're creating a new pathway. And the work afterwards, and the work really, this is where the real work happens, is in the time after your medicine session, is you cultivate that new path. You walk that path every day. You pull the weeds, plant the flowers, you visit the waterfall, and you celebrate in this new path. And you will definitely find yourself falling back into that old, well-worn path. It's totally normal. You've walked on that path for your whole life. Of course, you're going to find yourself back there. So without any judgment or, self-criticism or harshness towards yourself, you just redirect. Oh, yeah, I've got this new path. I have this new way of being in the world. I have this new way of seeing who I really am. This new true belief that I am inherently good. I am lovable. I am worthy. And you walk that, and you just pick yourself up and put yourself back on the new path where you're meant to be, and you keep walking there. And so this is really just around becoming more self-aware, right? Noticing where are your habits and your patterns, and what are those old paths that you've been walking? Getting to catch yourself. Oh, I'm back here again, and putting yourself on that new path. And that's really a lot of what we're doing in these sessions, is just becoming aware of, oh, that's what I do here. Oh, that's why I do this. Okay. And when we have this understanding of this awareness of what we're doing, and this understanding of why, we can bring compassion to ourselves. We can bring love and acceptance, and we can work with our inner child, who is that scared, alone little one, who is the one who finds safety in those old beliefs.
Yeah.
So, and we just get to know more of ourselves. And when we have that knowledge, we have the ability to make different choices. And so without that awareness, we're stuck without any choice.
Yeah. Yeah. What's coming up for me is just this, like, stepping into our power, right? The more we connect to ourselves, right, we get to really be empowered. And I know a lot of women listening to this, right, are really craving this sense of self-confidence, right? And the sense of, like, even just knowing how to tune into their intuition or connect with their bodies in a different way. And this is a surefire way to do that. This is a very, very, very powerful way of doing that, and really coming in, and like you said, in a safe environment, which most of us have never had our whole lives. Right. And like treading into this work, is a pretty life-changing way of seeing how you can be supported. Right. And really deeply repatterning that you're not alone. Right. And there's nothing wrong with you, and you're not broken, and you're lovable, and like all those things you mentioned, right. These core belief wounds that we all carry. It's pretty potent when we can do that, and we can see how easily that would shift our relationship with food, right? And our desire to nourish ourselves. And it's not perfect. I'm still working on it. I'm not perfect with my relationship with food. I'm never here toting that I am, right? And I love that explanation of the paths, because I remember you mentioning that to us one time at the end of a ceremony when we were coming down. You're like, okay, here's this new path, right, that you've created, and now you've got to walk it, right? You've got to continue walking it.
Now you have choice.
Yeah.
Right? And for so many of us, we feel like we're just on this automatic programming, and we feel like you feel stuck and trapped, and like, why do I keep finding myself here? And now you've seen a whole new path, like you have a whole new perspective. And so now you have choice and agency, and that is so empowering and really builds confidence. And as you walk that path and you see, I'm okay here. I'm accepted here. I'm shining my light here. And you want to spend more time on that path, and that old path starts to grow over and get weedy and, you know, kind of disappear over time.
Yeah. So what do you see? You know, I think this is really important because I know when I first started hearing about this work over 6 years ago, you know, I started hearing people, you know, doing these ceremonies, doing this work. I had a lot of my own beliefs or misconceptions or myths, you know, about what it meant to do this work, what it meant to, you know, engage in a ceremony. What do you see, you know, in the world or with people who maybe are coming to you who've never done this work before? You know, what do you see are some of the most common misconceptions or the most common, you know, myths that are out there about this work that, you know, we can kind of bust through here together today? Because I know that there's some women listening to this that are already in their head with the stories of like, this is wild, like this is not for me, or this is, you know, whatever the stories are. What do you see are the most common ones?
Yeah, I hear from a lot of people that they took ecstasy or LSD in college. And, you know, for them, it was a party drug and, you know, just a way to kind of like dance and let loose and have a good time. And, you know, and then other people are like, ooh, you know, like, I don't know, magic mushrooms, that sounds really scary or really intense, or I don't want to lose myself. I don't want to dissolve my ego. And I think so much of the misconceptions around these work has to do with set and setting. So when you take ecstasy at a rave or at a party, your intention there is to just relax, have a good time, you know, dance, connect with friends. And even some people will maybe have taken mushrooms in a similar way. Like, oh, we took mushrooms in college and we just hung out and, you know, kind of just tripped out. And so if that's your intention, that's your experience. In this work, we have an intention to be in connection, to do deep inner work. Our intention is to be open and curious and to explore ourselves and hopefully start to heal some old wounds. So those are very different settings.
Yeah.
And therefore it's a very different experience. And I think that is an important thing to keep in mind. And also that, you know, you may have had some experience working with magic mushrooms when you were in college, and you may feel like, oh, I had a pretty good experience. I can probably just do that again. I can probably just take these and, you know, just have a kind of chill weekend and have my own experience. And the important thing to remember is that the real work with these medicines happens in connection. The work happens when you're being witnessed and held and loved and cared for, when you're in your hardest places. That is massively healing because it's what you didn't get. So it is really important that we're creating the container, the framework when we're working with these medicines that really are supporting the greatest and the most ideal outcome.
Yeah, that's a big one that was for me, you know, that I'll add on to and speak to, because that was like coming into this, you know, I had this lens on of, well, like my whole life, I didn't do drugs. Like I drank, but I didn't do drugs. Maybe I smoked pot once in a blue moon, you know, being Canadian, I kind of had to in high school, but I was never like, that was not a line I was going to cross. And, you know, there was in my mind, there was like this, well, those are drugs that are like, a good girl doesn't do those, or like those are bad, right? Like I had all these thoughts around that's bad to do that stuff. And, you know, the more I started learning and actually seeing was like, I was coming at it through the lens of escapism. Right. And this is, you know, I really just want to define this and, you know, in what I've seen, right. There's a huge, and you just described this, but I'm going to say it in a different way, is like, there's a huge difference between, say, using a substance or psychedelic medicine to escape life and to numb out and to just party, right? And get out of your body versus using it as with the intention of, no, I'm going to go in and heal some shit. Like, I'm going in to do the work. And like, this medicine can be used for either or, right? And that, I think, was what was so standoffish to me, was seeing people use these things as tools to escape. And it was funny because at the time, here I was binging on sugar and drinking wine every night and being like judging people doing other medicines, right? And here I am, totally escaping in my own way. So full calling myself out on that. And I think that's just such an important message that I want to share with people, because like this intention that you're talking about, right, is like these medicines can actually be used with the proper intention of, and no judgment here. I'm not saying one is right and one's wrong. That's not what I mean. But, we can use these as, as such a powerful tool, and bringing that intention, like you just mentioned, right, of I'm going to go in and heal, and I'm going to set myself up in a supportive environment. I'm not going to be in the middle of the woods by myself in the dark, right, freaking out. This would be one of the fears that I know so many people that I even talk to, or even myself in the past, thinking, well, what if I have a bad trip? Right. And I'm actually curious if you could speak to that. Like, what are your thoughts on having a bad trip? And I know a lot of people have heard stories, or there's this very real fear out there around like, well, what if I have a bad trip? What are your thoughts on that? Or what do you say to people who come to you with that fear?
So there's two things there. One is there are contraindications for working with these medicines. So
Right.
if you are taking antidepressants, particularly with pathogens, it's not a good combination. You can end up with something called serotonin syndrome, which is very uncomfortable, and would that would be a bad trip if you ended up with serotonin syndrome. And then also people with uncontrolled high blood pressure shouldn't be working with these medicines. You would be uncomfortable. It wouldn't be a good experience. If you have uncontrolled seizures, like there are certain medical contraindications that you shouldn't be working with these medicines. So that's an important thing to talk about with your practitioner, your facilitator, your therapist. Really be honest about that up front, because it doesn't always mean you're not a candidate. It can mean that we're going to work with a different medicine or a different dose, or maybe you can taper off your medication or stop for a little while. There's ways we can work with that, but that's a really important thing to be thinking about in these medicines is the contraindications. And then the other thing with a bad trip, if for some people that's like, maybe their experience got too big. And they didn't feel contained. It got a little, like maybe they drifted and dissociated. Maybe they felt like they experienced an ego death, and that was really jarring and alarming. Some people are actually aiming for an ego death, and that's their intention in this work. But for some people, like, no. So it really comes down to working with somebody who has experience and knows how to hold you in these places, knows how to work within your window of tolerance, can recognize when an experience is maybe getting a little bit outside of your window of tolerance, and help to bring you back, help to co-regulate you, bring you back, slow things down, and so that you're not having a really, something that feels like too much. So a bad trip is way more likely to happen when you're not in a safe container. When you're working in a safe container with somebody who has experience and has training and knows how to hold you, you're not going to have a bad trip. The other thing that I do see happen quite regularly is people will have an expectation. They'll expect that I'm going to come in and do this ceremony, this journey, and this will happen. I will have cured my anxiety. I will have dealt with this addiction to food or this craving for sugar. I will have dealt with my anger. They'll have a very specific expectation. And if the, in the days after they're not feeling that expectation was met, they might feel disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
And what might have actually happened is, they healed an attachment wound.
Mm-hmm.
Or they were finally able to grieve, the loss of the innocence in their childhood. Something else really important may have happened, but because they had their heart set on a particular outcome, they're going to miss all of the other things that actually did happen. And that's always heartbreaking, honestly, when something, someone is just so set on a particular outcome and they're missing everything that really did happen. And that is the work that we do in integration together, is we really unpack what happened. Okay, so can we just pause the goal of curing your anxiety, and can we look at what we did do in the session and how that will, with time, evolve into less anxiety in your life?
Yeah.
So there are a few things around what constitutes a bad trip, and really it all comes down to working with somebody who has experience and can take you through the journey, and keep you safe and help you unpack it at the end.
Yeah, that's really what comes up for me as you're sharing all of those pieces, right? This is such a difference of like safely navigating trauma or difficult areas versus like being in a party or out in the woods and not expecting anything. And then all of a sudden a trauma comes up, right? Or all of a sudden old pain comes up and you're unprepared and the intention wasn't for that, right? It's such a difference when you're coming in with the intention of, like, I know when I go into ceremony, right? It's like, okay, bring it on. Like, I'm ready. Yeah. I can handle anything that comes up. And Deanna's going to be here to hold my hand the whole time. Like, I think in our last ceremony you did. Yeah. And I needed that, right? So, but I like always felt like, okay, I can handle this because I went in, and the more you experience this, I know for me, and I'll talk more about this in a different episode where I'll unpack more of my specific work. But this learning to let go of control and actually trust and surrender, right? And as you're talking about setting these intentions are really important and these goals, and then also being able to release them and trust that, what your body needs to process or to come up is what needs to be dealt with first before you can access the next piece, right? And it's the more you get into this, you'll see, exactly what Deanna and I are talking about. You'll be like, oh, okay, that's what they're talking about. But it's kind of hard to put into words before you actually experience it. But it's so true. So are there any other pieces here? Because I think this is such an important part of this conversation around harm reduction, right? We're talking about setting, right? Really setting yourself up, making sure that you are supported by the right person that knows what they're doing. And that's a big important piece as well. Obviously setting intentions. Like, are there anything else here around really doing this consciously? Because the last thing, and Deanna and I were talking about this before, right? This isn't for everyone. Yeah. And we don't want you to hear this podcast and see all the articles out there and just jump into the next person that you see hosting a ceremony and just do it, right? Like, this is something to be really honored, and like, this is very sacred, important work, and it's not for everybody. And, it should take some deep, reflection and consideration before just jumping in like it's the next fad diet. And this is not what's happening here. So is there anything you want to add around harm reduction here, or reminders for people as they're maybe starting to think, I wonder if this could be supportive in my healing journey?
This is I'm so glad you're bringing this up, Danny, because it's so important. So yes to everything you just said. Absolutely. And what I might add is, really dive in and do your own research. Talk to people who have done this work, and talk to, also, if you're coming to a place of thinking about doing something like this, talk to different practitioners, different therapists. Really, 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 really let your gut or your intuition guide you in this. If you're not, I work this way 100%. If it's not a solid yes, then it's a no for me. Mm-hmm. So and that's when I work with clients. If I don't feel 100% yes, we're a good fit, then it's a no. and I'll refer you to another practitioner, because there is a right practitioner out there for you.
Mm-hmm.
But also when I'm working with practitioners and I'm getting to know somebody, I take my time to get to know them. And I have specific questions that are really important to me, and you all will have specific questions that are really important to you. So spend some time to get to know, what do you need? Like, what will help you feel safe in this place? And really spend time getting to know your practitioner. Do you really feel safe with them? Because if you don't feel safe, you won't be able to go all the way in the session. So I encourage everyone to really tune into their intuition, into their gut, and really get a sense of, is this 100% yes? And if it's not, then give it some more time. Talk to some more people. And I will also say, like, there's a lot of information out there. So use your discretion. Like, do listen to your gut. Do I want to actually read this article? Do I actually want to listen to this podcast? Is this person kind of speaking to me, or are they speaking to a different audience? Trust yourself. That's really what I want to say here. Trust yourself. There is a part of you that knows exactly what you need. Tune into that part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Be okay to say no. It's okay if you spend 3 sessions getting to know a therapist, and at the end of that you decide, I don't want to do this with you. That's okay. That's brilliant.
Yeah. That's really important. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I feel called to add on to that. Like, it's not a rush.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I think some people, and this would have been me in the past, right? It's like, okay, this sounds really good. I want to do this. I've got some time. I'm going to book it in next month. I better interview people, and, like, let's get it going. Like, let's do it. And that's just not how this medicine works also. Right. Like, this is not a rush. It took me 5 years before I was, like, physically, mentally, emotionally ready to do my first work with this. I learned about it, and I was like, not ready. I can't let go of control. This is for druggies. Like, this isn't for me. Right. Like, it took me years of, like, sitting with this, hearing stories, talking to my friends, and watching documentaries. Like, it's starting to, like, bring it into my peripheral. And this is, my intention with this podcast. Like, maybe this is one of those signals for you, right? Or one of those little breadcrumbs on your trail to, like, this unfolding for you. But there's no rush. I mean, you can hear this episode and hear Deanna and I talking and go, you know what? I really feel called to try this and to do this work. And it could still be another year or two before you find the right practitioner, or the timing opens up in your schedule, or, like, it feels right. So don't rush it. There's time. Right. And trusting that guidance is sometimes the hardest, because we just want to, like, get things done. I know I'm, as a doer, it's like, let's book it in and I'm doing it, versus allowing. Right. That's been a huge part of this work for me, is really trusting in that process and not rushing back in even to my next ceremony. Right. And actually let's talk to that a little bit as we before we run out of time, like, this integration piece, because I know this is something that a lot of people skip over. And I see a lot of people, going to Peru, doing these amazing, retreats, doing this work with a therapist here in North America, and just, diving right into a new one, or not actually taking the lessons and doing anything with them. So can you speak a little bit to, like, what is integration and why it's so important, and maybe how we actually start doing that?
Yeah. Yeah. Integration really is the work.
Yeah.
And I can say honestly that I, particularly when I was first starting out working with ayahuasca, when I would come home from Peru, I would jump right back into my life.
Yeah.
And really with kind of the assumption that the work was done. That I went, I did my work, I worked hard, I suffered, and I could kind of just coast. I could kind of just go on with life. And I was really, that was a mistake. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I didn't lose the gifts that I uncovered in those ceremonies, but I certainly did not make use of them in a timely fashion. So we spend time after these ceremonies, first of all, like, really unpacking and making sense of what came up. So, maybe you did some exploration around your relationship and I'll just use this example because this is really current for me.
You can use me as an example too, whatever comes up.
um, so I, for me, I get triggered by women in positions of power and authority that I presume to be in power and authority over me. And, the, in my own work, I've come to discover that I felt really let down by the women in my family because they didn't stand up for me. They didn't protect me. They didn't stand up against the men and stop the abuse. So now when I'm in a relationship with women, particularly women who are older than me, who I see who should be leaders, I don't feel safe with them. And I feel I don't trust them. So that, doing the work in the ceremony around the women in my childhood was one thing. But now I take that knowledge, that understanding, that perspective that I gained in that ceremony of going back in time as a little one and feeling the fear and feeling the letdown of not being protected. I can now look at how I'm getting triggered and what is really happening here, because it would, in the past, it would have been, well, I'm just triggered, I'm just angry, I'm just going to cut you off. And instead now it can be, I can look at that and be like, okay, there's my little one is feeling really afraid here. How can I take care of her here? How can I bring that wisdom that I gained from that ceremony into my life today and act in a different way, make different choices, show up in a different way, have compassion for myself, take care of that wound, and be in relationship in the world in a totally different way. Now I'm not cutting off from women. I'm actually moving towards them and feeling curious and open and wanting to know more about them rather than, you're not safe, get away from me. So this is the work of integration, where we're taking these little nuggets that we get in these medicine spaces and we play them out in our life with a greater understanding. And hopefully we have some support along the way, because that's a lot to unpack by yourself. So hopefully you're working, either you have your own therapist outside of the medicine work, or the person that's holding you in the medicine space is also supporting you long term afterwards, so that you can take these little things, all these little bits of information, and apply them in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. This is that walk, right? That trotting of that new path, right? I just love that metaphor really applies perfectly here, right? Because if we can cut the new path in a ceremony, but unless we walk it and trot it in and plant the flowers, right, it's going to grow over again. So we've opened up this opportunity, and it is really that follow through. I can't remember if it was you or someone else that I worked with, or someone else in the space, right, that said like the ceremony or the session is actually 20% of the work, right? 80% is the actual integration and committing to, okay, here's this new, I just learned something. Here's this new awareness. And now, every day, every week, reflecting on it, journaling, right? Having conversations about it. And that's been, obviously so vital in me solidifying those new pieces of me, like in working with you for months after our ceremony, helping me put those pieces together versus just forgetting about it and getting back to life, right? And getting back to my old patterns and ways. So this is such an opportunity, and that, I think that's really important to hit home. This integration piece is the work. That's what you said at the beginning, right? It's so true. This is the actual work. You get like the crack is open, and then it's like, okay, what are you going to do with it, right? How are you going to actually put this into practice in your everyday life, learning to set boundaries or let go of the people pleasing, let go of control, let go of old patterns, right? Or beliefs about not being lovable, and, whatever wounds it is that come up. Takes work.
It definitely is work, and I will say it's not always easy.
Yeah, no.
And because you're really having to you're showing up in a new way, and that feels unknown, and the unknown always feels unsafe to us.
Yeah.
So even just knowing that I'm doing something new and I might not feel totally safe here, even just that awareness, you can be like, okay, so yeah, I don't feel like this, feels a bit scary, but I'm going to do it anyway, because I believe in like who I really am and who I really want to be in the world. You have this truer, real. We often in these sessions we get a glimpse into who we really are,
Mm-hmm.
and that is such a powerful moment. And when you get to see and actually feel
Yeah.
your incredible light or your inherent goodness,
Mm-hmm.
or how fucking amazing you truly are, and that there is only one of you here, and that in itself is such a massive gift to this world. So if you can access that, that gives, at least for me, has given me like the courage to really start to, the courage and the drive to walk that new path, to take the risks, to show up and try something even though it feels
Mm-hmm.
really scary, and do things in a new way even when I feel really scared and like, ooh.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is how we grow, right? Stepping
Yeah,
out of our comfort zone in that way.
yeah,
And I really feel called to say, just because I know a lot of the women that I work with, right, feel this immense fear, whether or not you're aware of it, listening to this, but of like, okay, well, when I actually start to see who I really am, I'm not going to like it. And like there's something wrong, like inherently, like there was something wrong with me when I came into this world, right? Like there's this fear of like, and it breaks my heart, but I just want to call all of you out on this, because like what Deanna is sharing is that it's so not true. I guarantee once you actually start to tap into your true essence, it is nothing but love and light and just gloriousness that you are as this being on the planet. And yeah, your journey might have been messy. You've probably made a lot of mistakes. You've hurt people. We all have. Like, it's all part of our journey. But at your core, please don't be afraid of seeing that, because it's actually the way through. So I want to call that fear out, because I know a lot of women have that fear of like, well, when I really open up, I'm not going to like what I see. And that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. Yeah.
I have never sat with someone who I didn't wholly love.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We are all innocent.
Yeah. 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 And it's really emotional and powerful when like someone like Deanna, right, sits with you. And like, I remember having that experience with you, and and I endeavor to do this with my clients as well. It's like actually looking at you, seeing only light and beauty in me. It was like this reflection was like scary. Like what's happening here? Like this person isn't judging me. This person isn't, like, she's seeing something in me that I don't see, and that's scary, right? And beautiful, and really, like, it's helped me really open up more and more to loving myself and seeing that in myself. So this is just another reason why this model and this is important to do in connection, right? With someone who can really see through you in a way, right? In a loving way, not in a scary way. Like, I see your essence, and and it's beautiful. And as I practice, even in my work, I'm getting better and better at that as well. Like, really seeing through people's outside stuff to the core, right? And it's so powerful to witness people there, because we can have compassion for the mistakes or the things they say that aren't in alignment. Like, we're human, and we can just be more compassionate with each other, right? And could you imagine if we were all like that in the world? Wouldn't that be cool?
That's what we're doing. That's what
we're here to do. Yeah. One podcast episode at a time, one ceremony at a time.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've talked about a lot today, and I want to be really respectful of your time, because I know you have a limited time. So the question now on everyone's mind is like, well, how do I actually start looking for someone to do this work with? Because I know obviously all over the world, in different countries, different provinces, different states, there's different regulations or different laws. And for most, this is still sort of an underground, not necessarily legally acceptable work to be doing yet. So what would you recommend as sort of next steps for people who want to maybe try to find someone in their area, or even just some of your best recommendations for organizations or research or resources for anybody who maybe want to just learn more? And maybe you can't mention any of this as well. So that's okay. Like,
such a good question, Danny. And I think it's going to be really dependent on where in the world you are. In certain states, psilocybin is decriminalized, I believe. Maybe it's even legal. I'm not sure. So finding a psilocybin practitioner will be fairly easy in some parts of the United States. Um, yeah, I think it's such a tricky question. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I really don't feel like I have an answer other than talking about it with your friends, like starting to open
Hmm.
the conversation.
Hmm.
There's so many people doing this work, but a lot of
Yeah.
it is underground. So
Yeah.
start talking and asking, and you will you'll land on someone who knows someone who has
Yeah.
experience and who can kind of open a door for you to
Hmm.
find one or more practitioners. I do encourage you to talk to more than one.
Yeah.
Um, there are plenty of organizations out there, uh, like in Canada, we have the Canadian Psychedelic Association, or they may have changed their name to Psychedelic Association of Canada. Anyways, there are organizations that have a lot of opportunities for education, and they also have forums and things where you can ask questions. And like I'm on there as a practitioner, so you may find a practitioner on these places as well.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so I would look for um, like use your best judgment. Look for credible organizations like
Hmm.
the Canadian Psychedelic Association,
Yeah.
and I'm sure there's similar organizations in the United States and other parts of the world. Start there.
Hmm.
um, Start going to attend their webinars, attend their, like, they often have online social events and Q&As and things like that. um,
Yeah.
yeah, so it might just be that you start Googling a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems funny. It's like, to start hitting the web with this sort of thing, but more and
Yeah.
more, and it is such a really tricky line. And I think like access is tricky because we
Yeah.
can't publicly talk about this. And I know like we're not going to publicly share how to contact you, right? Like this is very sacred and very tricky work because most of it is underground. But I want to echo that as well. I know a lot of my clients have come to me as a tool to, if you live on the West Coast, of Canada, there's, I'm able to be that resource for some of my clients. And, that is like, I just want to speak to like how I found my people. It was through exactly that, talking to friends, right? Like talking to friends who I knew like had known someone who did some work before. And that's actually how we met you. I was at a yoga retreat and I overheard one of the other people there speaking about the work that they were doing with MDMA assisted therapy. And I was like, hey, do you know someone local? Right. And they're like, yeah, this cool chick named Deanna. And that's how we met.
Yeah.
And just over a year ago, actually, we just realized that
Yeah.
on Thanksgiving, didn't we? So beautiful. And the first work that I ever did with psilocybin with a shaman, that was also through a friend. I just felt ready, and I asked a friend who I knew years ago had done some work, and she hooked me up, right? Like, so, it's happening more than we think it is. And this is also part of the like unfolding process. Is like, just start planting the seed. And even once you set the intention of, I want to do this work, it's really interesting to see what sort of things start coming into your peripheral, right? You don't see anything. It's like, I want to buy a red sports car. And then all of a sudden, all you see is red sports cars, right? So it's there, and it's happening a lot. And it's just about kind of, making that choice to maybe welcome that into your life, right? And meet that. It just takes that one person that's like, oh yeah, I know someone that you could talk to, or that's in that world. And once you're in, it's like, everybody's connected. It's this huge, beautiful network, and it's there. So I want to just mention something too, and we don't really have time to dive into this, but there is a difference, and maybe I'll talk more about this in my deeper dive, where I'm sharing more about my experiences in the next episode. But this new movement that's happening, and the like legal ways that you can access a lot of these medicines through like medical trials, right? Like there's a lot of organizations developing that are actually government approved, at least here in Canada, and I'm sure in the States and other countries, that are, are a resource for some people, are also very expensive, very clinical, different approach. Not to say that it's worse or better, but those are some things as well that through some of those organizations you might stumble upon and kind of connect with, or come and join us underground in this.
And it won't be long now until it's available a lot more.
Yeah.
In clinical settings. It's really, really close.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure there's a whole discussion that we could have on that too.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I talked over you. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So ketamine is a legal, it's a psychedelic. And there are ketamine clinics. They're doing a lot of work with ketamine and depression, and I think also ketamine and alcoholism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 So I'll make sure to link a few resources below this episode in the show notes for anybody who, wants to, see documentaries or just start kind of learning more and maybe accessing some of these organizations. And thank you so much, Deanna, for coming on today and helping me, come out publicly, and talk about this powerful, incredible tool that has been massive in my growth and healing over the last 6 years. And I guess 4 years since I did my first medicine ceremony, but, is there any final words, anything that you're really feeling called from your heart to share as we wrap things up?
Really, I just, will reiterate, to trust your inner knowing, trust your intuition, trust your wisdom. You already know. Yeah. And I would say that goes with everything in life, not just whether or not you want to work with psychedelics.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trust yourself.
Yeah.
You already know.
Yeah. That's such a beautiful reminder. We need that reminder every day, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for being here. And thank you everyone for listening to this whole episode. If you're still listening, I hope that you learn something new. And I hope that you even spend some time as we finish this episode, or you hit pause or stop, to just spend a couple minutes with yourself, tuning in and just paying attention to what maybe this moved in you and what messages are coming through, even just from listening to us have this conversation. And just be curious about what comes up. So I hope that you do that. That's your homework from this session. Just really soak this in and connect and see if this is something that you are intuitively maybe feeling drawn to, or not. And that's okay too. This might not be a tool for you, and listen to that as well. For sure. All right, everyone, we will see you in the next episode, where I will be personally sharing a lot more into my specific experiences and the healing that I've done using these medicines. So thank you again, Deanna, for helping set the stage. This was really, really beautiful. I always love talking to you, and I can't wait for our next ceremony together.
Same. Thanks, Danny.
All right, bye, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. If you're loving what we talked about today, please remember to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone you love. And if you're ready to dive deeper into discovering your root causes and patterns that are keeping you hooked on sugar, be sure to check out our brand new free workshop series that will help you kick emotional eating for good. Find the link to download this free series and other amazing resources in the show notes below.